Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast for our penultimate episode of at least my tenure as your faithful host. My name as always is Christopher Shepard. This is the second to last time you'll be hearing me. It's been a ride. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more tomorrow, but ultimately excited to have had this experience, been able to talk to you guys, interact with you guys, whether it be through the comments section. So a little bit bittersweet as we're winding down my tenure here. But we still have two more great shows ahead, and happy Thursday to you all for those who have come to watch me for my last couple of episodes. We're concluding our MLB top fives with our outfielders, then our pitchers, and last but not least, our relievers. Then we're going to do something a little bit different here, me talking about why some specific teams are equipped to win the World Series this year, starting off with the crosstown rivals in the tri-state area, the New York Mets and the New York Yankees. They should be fascinating segments. Both of these teams have great shots of winning it all this year, but they have some challenges ahead that I want to address, so it should be a fun show. I'm really excited because these are my last couple of days and I want to make these shows as fantastic for you as possible. But before we get into any of that good content, I do want to remind you all to like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network if you haven't done so already. Even though I am leaving, there are still going to be a lot of great shows, a lot of new show hosts to interact with throughout the network. So if you want to keep up to date with all the new content that comes out from here on out, like, follow, and subscribe. But if you want to continue to contribute and interact to the shows around the network a little bit more directly, avail yourselves of the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features, as well as always the best way to leave your opinions, feedback, input for the network, all the shows around the network. Go support every single person contributing to the network. It always makes our shows that much better when you, our faithful audience, interact with them. And I'm just so happy to have found my own core audience as well throughout my time here. Without further ado, let's jump right into our first segment of today's penultimate show, starting off with one of our final MLB top fives, talking about the outfielders. Not a lot of them get as much love as they need to, especially the center fielders, and that's going to be the interesting through line of this list. All of these players, all five of them, are corner outfielders. No center fielders have made this top five outfielders list. It's no indictment of them, but I just think there are so many talented players that can shift around the outfield for you in Major League Baseball that it's difficult to really pin them down to the identity of a singular trait in the outfield, so to speak. Like, there are fantastic center fielders in their own right, and we can make a whole list of them. But these corner outfielders really stand above some of those natural out-and-out center fielders, in my opinion. So without further ado, let's just rank them for you all, shall we? It should be a good list, and I'm really excited to conclude my MLB top fives ahead of this season. Starting off with our number 5 outfielder, very familiar guy, you might have heard of him, Juan Soto. Big money move across town to his former team's big rivals in the New York Mets. 15 years, $765 million. I don't need to tell you why the Mets paid that sum. He's an incredible player. But I do want you, if you are a baseball fan, to think about this in terms of his salary. Because I can give you all the stats, and they'll be fantastic in their own right. But I want you to think about the impact of this salary, because this is probably the biggest salary we might ever see in the history of Major League Baseball. Because I don't know if there's going to be anyone that could garner that amount of money anytime soon. The Mets have committed more value in tickets for Soto's family per game than the salary of their own manager, Carlos Mendoza, for 2025. That is incredible to ponder. Soto's family adds more value to the Mets than their own manager. That's incredible to behold, but he is worth every single penny. Sometime this season, he's going to collect career hit number 1,000, and he's going to be someone who could be in the reckoning to be one of the final players ever to reach the 3,000 hit club. And doing it in New York, still in New York for that matter, is going to put him in the national spotlight for the next decade and a half. And hopefully will also bring him in some World Series as well to bolster his case for Cooperstown. We already know how excellent an athlete is, and he's just a couple World Series away from truly cementing himself as a future Hall of Famer. So he should be on this list. He comes in at number 5. Then number 4, someone who kind of had a down year last year, but for a team that I think are going to get back to where they were just 2 years ago, he should still be a fantastic player, and that is Corbin Carroll. He's had a lot of positional changes throughout his career, could even play in the infield when all is said and done, if need be, but he kind of went through what they call in sports that sophomore slump. It's always a classic thing that happens to all these sophomore athletes in any major league for that matter. But still, a common thread for all of these lists is that even when players such as Corbin Carroll kind of hit a slump, kind of hit a roadblock, they still managed to put up elite stats. He still managed to score 121 runs, steal 35 bases, and still play excelling, for that matter, at the defensive side of the game. In fact, over his final 56 games of the year, he scored 56 runs, had a .931 OPS. So consider that, and this is still a player with a lot of upside for a team that's expected to compete in the NL for years to come. Still a very young team, and I think that even though they're going to be competing with the Dodgers in the NL West for many years and perhaps the Padres as well, Corbin Carroll just gives them a little bit of upside so that even if they continuously get into the wild card because of the Dodgers' greatness, they'll still have a chance to compete for the World Series because of the great players they already have in their lineup. So Corbin Carroll comes in at the number 4 position in my humble opinion. Then, no, actually, oh my god, I skipped someone on this list. I do believe that the person I skipped was Ronald Acuna Jr. I accidentally put 4 players on this list, but I completely forgot to write down who that 4th player was. But Ronald Acuna Jr., in fact, should ultimately come in at number 3, in my opinion, over a guy like Corbin Carroll. Just because even though you can say that injuries have set him back and he shouldn't potentially even be in the top 3 outfielders in the major leagues, he still is someone who, once he is cemented in that Braves lineup, is going to give you everything he has. He's the heartbeat, the vocal leader of this Braves team, and I think that he's still on track to have a Hall of Fame career. No setback is going to put a player like Ronald Acuna Jr. in danger unless it continues to happen. And I don't necessarily think that the Braves are going to be a team that are going to be set back by injuries because of their depth, but Ronald Acuna Jr. is such a pivotal player when he's in the lineup, when he's out of the lineup, and it translates to what I think their long-term success will be in the league. So as long as Ronald Acuna Jr. remains healthy, by all means he should be a top 3 outfielder in the major leagues. But if not, then it could be to his detriment and potentially to the team's detriment in the long run. So he remains on this list, in my humble opinion, just based off of his pure, raw talent, despite considering injuries. So make of that what you will, but I still think he's more than the sum of his parts, even when injured, because then you see how important he is to this Braves team. Then, at number 2, a very, very, very interesting guy, kind of leapfrogging everyone, Kyle Tucker, making the big money move from Houston to Chicago, and I think it's the smart choice, because Houston's not profiling to look all that good in the AL West. They can still contend because the Rangers and the Mariners are hinging on a lot of things going right for them. But Kyle Tucker made a smart move because the Chicago Cubs could be a sneaky contender, in my opinion, to make the postseason and go on a deep run. And he is someone who does deserve the amount of money he got in terms of that salary he just signed with the Cubs. But in terms of stats, he really is impressive because last year he was dealing with an injury, and Houston really was kind of a team that meandered its way into the postseason. But in 277 at-bats, he garnered 13 doubles, 23 homers, and 56 walks, and only 54 strikeouts, and that was a total of 4.7 WAR. So Kyle Tucker almost certainly deserves to be on this list. Maybe not as high as some of you would think, but I feel he certainly deserves to be at the very least in the top 5. And if you don't think similar to me, then let me know in the comments. But I truly believe he's done enough, earned this move, and most importantly can help this Cubs team improve in the long run, because they are on the precipice of being a solid team in the NL, and Kyle Tucker can take that over that hump. But he's not as good as our number 1 outfielder, Aaron Judge. Now, this could impact him in a lot of ways, the absence of Soto. But one way that it impacts him positively is that he can move to his natural right field position, because last year, Soto forced him into center field. But now that he's gone, he moves back to his natural position, so defensively, we could see him kind of get back to where he once was. But I still think he's an outstanding athlete either way, irregardless of how he performs in the outfield. His hitting more than makes up for whatever foibles he encounters in the outfield. .322 batting average last year, 58 home runs, 144 RBIs. And here's an interesting stat. In extra innings, he had a 900 OBP and had 4 intentional walks and 10 plate appearances and batted .800. That's incredible to behold. Clutch hitter, clutch player, most importantly, someone who's not going to be a liability for the Yankees, and they know is going to be a steady presence for years to come. He is getting older, but I just think that over the next 5 to 10 years, he's still going to be someone who has that power in his offensive side of the game, and someone who, most importantly, is still going to remain one of the league's best players. So there you have it, my top 10 outfielders. Some might say I could have included a center fielder amongst their ranks, but it's up to me, and this list is very personal to me, and I think that all 5 of these guys are, at the end of the day, the top quote-unquote overall outfielders in the MLB. But coming next, we transition over to the pitching side of things, finally getting to dissect that side of the game right after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world?
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. And for our second segment of today's show, we'll be talking about the top 5 pitchers. But before we get into that, I do want to remind you, as always, if you want to contribute and interact with the show a little bit more directly, avail yourselves of the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features. Even though I am leaving, I still want to shout out all my co-workers who have been doing fantastic things for other shows around the network in their own right. Go support them as well. A lot of new guys are going to be coming in, so go and show them your support as well. It's not just about, quote-unquote alum guys. These are guys who are established veterans with GSMC and then we're going to be getting some new blood. So I appreciate all your support for not just my show, but the network as well. But without further ado, let's jump into our second segment of today's show. Let's get into the pitching side of things in the MLB, looking at our top 5 pitchers. Now, this is probably the list that's going to get the most controversy out of a lot of you guys, a lot of skeptics potentially, but this is my personal list, and it's based on the foundation of growth among several of these players. A lot of these players are in fact younger guys, and I think that's the direction pitching is going to go. And since this is not an era where innings are going to be a huge factor in how we think about pitchers and pitching as that matters, but ultimately I feel that all of these guys have transcended the era they're in and could potentially be innings eaters for you as well. So without further ado, let's jump right into the top 5 pitchers in the MLB, in my opinion. Coming in at number 5, a guy who may, to some, have shown signs of regression in past years, made a big money move to the Arizona Diamondbacks, a 6-year, $210 million deal. In fact, Corbin Burnes. This is someone who's been around, whether it was with the Orioles last year, whether it was the Brewers before, now with Arizona, and someone who a lot of people could see dropping out of this top 5, in my opinion. But here's the fact of the matter. I think that now he's on Arizona, he becomes their top pitcher. Nothing against Merrill Kelly and Brandon Pfaadt, but Corbin Burnes still has elite pure stuff, even though some might say he's regressing. Still ranking in the top 5 in the majors in terms of ERA with 2.92 ERA. It came 5th in Cy Young voting last year, so I'm not too worried about his regression. And if the Diamondbacks play well and they combine elite pitching with the power they have in their lineup, and most importantly, the youth they're bringing up, then I think this could be an astute signing for them. So Corbin Burnes is someone who, even though might slip out of the top 5 and maybe out of the top 10 in the upcoming years, still can bring a lot of value to this young Arizona Diamondbacks team. So that's why I still want to keep him in this top 5, to show that there could be value in experience, and Corbin Burnes has that in spades, one of the most experienced players on this list, so I can't leave him out, despite the fact, that a lot of you might be skeptical about his inclusion in the first place. Corbin Burnes comes in number 5. Here's where it kind of gets weird, right? Here's where we get a couple of youthful guys who are a little bit more perspective in how we're going to view them. And so I do want to remind you all that these are guys who could steadily improve. And so the fact that they're in my top 5 in the first place is quite incredible. And it just goes to show that they'll consistently improve and be in the top 5 for years to come. Some of these guys might fall out over the next couple of years, but some of these guys who are younger can remain in these ranks for the next 5 to 10 years if they're on the right track and maintain that right track. So at number 4, I'm going to go with Garrett Crochet. He switched Sox teams, going from the terrible Chicago White Sox to the more promising Boston Red Sox. In my opinion, deserved the move, and he was never going to have much success in Chicago anyways. So he, along with Walker Buehler, consist of a dynamic pair of pitchers for Boston that can deliver for you in terms of your rotation setup. And I think that Garrett Crochet really looks like someone who's going to explode even more in the MLB throughout the next couple of years, especially if the Boston Red Sox, with a promising farm system, can prove they can be competitive in that division. You talk about 209 batters in 146 innings last year, the highest strikeout rate of any pitcher with 100 or more innings. Now goes along with Walker Buehler to Boston and creates a pair of dominant pitchers that will, most importantly, challenge the offenses of the AL East more than you would think. And that's why I think that Garrett Crochet, even though he's a young guy, deserved this move. Because it's about the promise that the Boston Red Sox see in youthful players. And the fact that they're bringing up a lot of players in terms of the infield to their farm system and being able to acquire two young guys in Buehler and Garrett Crochet, I think it's very integral to how we're going to view them over the next couple of years, especially if they continue to contend in the AL East. That's why I wanted to include Garrett Crochet in this list, even though some might wait to see how he performs in that setup. I still choose to believe that Garrett Crochet has a bright future ahead of them, and his first season in Chicago was only the beginning of a prolific MLB career. So Garrett Crochet is at number 4. Now number 3, a guy who I really respect, really has had a very intriguing career. Some would have called him a journeyman at certain points in his career. He was kind of wallowing with the Mets, never really fit into that rotation when there were still players like Harvey and Syndergaard there. And now that he's in Philly on the rival, really coming into his own, forming a dynamic partnership with Aaron Nola as one of the best pitcher tandems in all of the MLB, and that is Mr. Zach Wheeler. Last year, he got 4 out of 30 first-place votes and 25 second-place votes when he finished behind Chris Sale for the Cy Young Award. And I think that Zach Wheeler has shown that he's capable of winning a Cy Young. He's made 122 starts over the past 4 seasons. He has a 2.92 ERA in that span. He's averaged more than 6 innings per start, so we talked about how important innings are to some players in this era. So by going 6 innings, which is the threshold for a lot of these guys, proving that he has the longevity needed in big game settings. And he has an ERA plus over that time span of 141 as well. He was 4th in inning pitch last year, 200, and his ERA last year was the 3rd best as well. So Zach Wheeler is someone who has truly transcended what we thought he could be when he was still someone in the Mets struggling to get many games in that rotation. So now that he is someone who's such a high-profile pitcher, we can now start to view him as someone who can also be capable of bigger things. I don't know if those are Hall of Fame level things, but they're certainly capable of World Series things, so to speak. So that's why I think Zach Wheeler sits perfectly at number 3 here. And then these other 2 guys, I just think one of them, again, is a young player, has his whole career ahead of him, and just is looking to project a little bit better over the next couple of years than Zach Wheeler. And the number 1 guy is truly incredible in terms of how he mows down people consistently multiple times to the lineup. So in number 2, let's talk about Paul Skeens, and then we'll get into number 1, who a lot of people I don't think will necessarily be mad about. Paul Skeens at 2, though, might seem a little bit high for him, but listen to these stats. 170 strikeouts in 133 innings, an ERA plus of 2.14. Compare that to the elite pitchers of this past generation, Clayton Kershaw, Chris Sale, even the guy at number 1. None of them have had that number in their careers. They didn't even reach it last year. The 2 Cy Young winners, and Sale and the number 1 guy who we're going to talk about, while winning Cy Young awards. That just goes to show that Paul is someone who has Cy Young caliber talent and is someone who is outmatching and outpacing elite pitchers of bygone eras. Well, not necessarily that too long ago, but you get the idea. In terms of how much talent is showing up in his stats. And so that's why Skeens is someone who really deserves to be in this top 5, even though he's only going into his 2nd year. And yes, the Pirates might not be an elite team like some of these other ones on this list, but still, really, really, really exciting young man to watch. And to prove a small sample that can really transcend stats-wise. In terms of number 3 hitters in opposing lineups, some of the most important hitters in lineups, batted 115 against him. Only 1 extra base hit and 21 strikeouts. And that's incredible to behold for someone who's still kind of developing in this Pirates team. But for now, he's not above my number one guy in Tariq Skubal, who still remains, in my opinion, one of the best quote-unquote innings eaters of the modern era. Here's an incredible stat to compound that. A lot of the time, once you get used to a pitcher, the third time around, chances are you're more likely to get a hit once you reach that threshold. His third time through opposing lineups, Tariq Skubal has held opposing hitters to a .215 average. He's still only 28 years old. He got Scott Boras as his agent, and he's going to be commanding big money. And this is someone at the peak of his powers, right? This is someone that, for all intents and purposes, could remain in Detroit and make them contenders for years to come, even if they had this small ball aesthetic about them. But if he does make a big money move, I wouldn't be mad at it because he truly has the numbers to back him up. He has the Cy Young to back him up now, and he has the stats. Most importantly, the stats in important areas of pitching today. So going through the list, I don't think you can find someone who can consistently mow down opposing batters at the rate that Tariq Skubal can. And the stats prove it. And potentially a big contract coming up in his short-term future could prove it as well. So there you have my top 5: Corbin Burnes, Garrett Crochet, Zach Wheeler, Paul Skeens, and a number 1, Mr. Tariq Skubal. But coming up next, we're going to be talking about the guys who take over for them, the relievers, the relief pitchers who I believe are going to be the best in the majors next season. We'll be right back with this short break to talk about them. I'm really excited about this one as well. But we'll be right back with this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolute.
Hello everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. And for our third segment of today's show, we're going to be concluding our MLB top 5s with the relief pitchers, one of my favorite positions in baseball, just because you have to back up your starting pitcher. And if you don't have a good bullpen, or at the very least an elite relief pitcher to close games out, then I don't know what to think of your team, because that's what you need to have to truly win games in the MLB. And these guys, this top 5 specifically, have proven that in spades. Even for teams that are not necessarily going to contend this year, there are still elite players. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. Starting off at number 5, Mason Miller of one of those teams who are not going to contend next year, but maybe are on the precipice of contending in what could be a very volatile AL West over the next couple of years. Mason Miller of the Oakland A's. And here's the thing. What I love about Mason Miller is that he's still young, still someone who can grow in this Oakland A's team. And as they move to Las Vegas, he's someone who brings a lot of upside and hope, and most importantly, optimism to that move. He is someone that, even though does not necessarily play the sexiest position, and in my opinion isn't as yet as big a star as a guy like Brenton Rooker or Shea Langoliers, in my opinion, who are still in their own right, not necessarily high-profile MLB stars, but probably the bigger ones on the team. Miller is someone who does the important job, being able to win you games by closing in spectacular fashion. 35.6% K rate, only a 5.9% walk rate, ranks among the top 5 in the MLB in terms of those very important stats for a reliever. And what I love about this Oakland move to Las Vegas, even though it's going to piss off a lot of fans, I think that it allows them to find a foundation in where young guys like Miller can be the faces of your team, even in terms of the positions they play. Because chances are you would never want a reliever to be as high profile as, say, your designated hitter or power hitting center fielder, but that's what Mason Miller can be. And I don't necessarily think the Oakland A's are a team that are designed to win with power, right? They're designed to win by being able to close out games defensively, and Mason Miller is a big part of that. So even though they might be a couple of years from true contention, and they'll never contend to the point where they're going to be a team that score a lot of runs, have a number of power hitters in their lineup, Mason Miller is going to be the face of this franchise. That's why he's at number 5. And he very well could be, over the next couple of years, the number 1 reliever when everything is said and done. But I just want to showcase him now when we're a little bit more iffy about Oakland and their transition to Las Vegas. And then, when the move to Las Vegas is complete and Mason Miller's much more elite than he already is, that's when we start to consider him as one of the league's elite relievers. So at number 5, he will remain for now. Then at number 4, one of the great relievers in the MLB at the current moment. I'm sad he's doing it with Cleveland. Emmanuel Clase. Emmanuel Clase, it was painful to see him go as a Texas Rangers fan a couple of years ago, but kudos to him, man, because he went to Cleveland, found a situation that allowed him to grow into the team and allow Cleveland to assume a nice identity of an elite defensive team that has elite closers. Still one other closer to talk about on this list from Cleveland, so this is going to show how elite they've built up their bullpen. But Clase especially is someone who I truly regard as someone to really define the relief pitching role of the next couple of years. Maybe not as much as Mason Miller will, because he's a little bit older than him, and who knows, maybe Cleveland regresses to the mean a little bit. I don't necessarily think that their style of play is sustainable in terms of being a true contender in the AL year in, year out, but they are in the weakest AL division, so anyone can win in that regard. But Emmanuel Clase gives them a shot each and every single year. He actually is the one who was the one with the 35.6% K rate and 5.9% walk rate. I wrote my notes a little bit differently. And going back to Mason Miller, he's just someone who really excelled and might have exceeded the stat lines of Emmanuel Clase in terms of his own strikeout rate at 41.4%, but I wanted to correct that. But still, Emmanuel Clase, even though in terms of stats, a guy like Mason Miller's catching up to him a little bit, he still can perform at an elite level. Now, he might likely be someone who could drop out of these rankings just because, A, he's aging a little bit, and B, I don't necessarily know if Cleveland is going to stick around as a top contender, but just because of his arsenal, that's the reason to believe that he is someone who is not going to go down easily in terms of his regression. So Emmanuel Clase is at number 4 right now, in my opinion. Then, let's talk about Mr. Ryan Helsley, someone who's been consistent for another team that I feel is not going to contend as much this year in St. Louis, a team with way too many questions to determine, but Ryan Helsley has locked it down for them last year. Truly incredible year. 66.1 innings pitched, 2.04 ERA, 79 Ks, 40 saves overall. And most impressive stat to back that up is that he has 3 straight sub 2.5 ERA seasons. I believe 2 of them have come in the last 4 years. And so that's reason to believe that even though St. Louis is not necessarily looking like the most promising team, middling farm system, too many questions about contract situations in the infield, especially with Nolan Arenado, but having an elite closer, at the very least in this lineup, to kind of offset all the noise surrounding this Cardinals team, leads me to believe that Ryan Helsley doesn't care if the Cardinals are a contender. He might end up elsewhere in years' time. He, as well as Emmanuel Clase, are not necessarily going to stick around as long as, say, a Mason Miller to see if they can rise up these rankings, but he is someone who fits in perfectly as the middle player in this list just because he's someone who's inoffensive and just gets the job done for a decent team and not a solid team. So that's why Ryan Helsley, in my opinion, sits at number 3. Just because St. Louis could be good this year, but I'm not necessarily counting on it. So that's why Ryan Helsley is done in a little bit. And so that just goes to show how seriously I'm taking the relief pitching right now. Because it's tough, because there are a lot of elite guys on these squads. It's just that their squads don't do much for them to bolster support as their cases for being some of the best relievers in the sport rise. And that's why Ryan Helsley, even though some could say he could regress because the St. Louis Cardinals are regressing, should be acknowledged before that eventually happens. So I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt here. Then let's talk about the second Cleveland Guardians, reliever in this list, Cade Smith. Someone who has a 37% K rate over 4 years, 2 in the last 4, 2 above, I don't know what I wrote here, 2 above 40 as well over the past couple of years. So Cade Smith is really someone who I think is going to usurp Emmanuel Clase as the best, most elite Cleveland Guardians reliever, and potentially already has. But still, like I said before, both of these guys highly depend on this Cleveland Guardians team's propensity to play high-end defense. And so, if they come into the games and they have a comfortable lead, then chances are we might not necessarily understand how great they are. But these two guys are predicated on only coming in with 1-run leads, 2-run leads at that, and holding it down. If that's how the Cleveland Guardians play, then maybe we get to see a couple more years of these guys' greatness. But chances are that style of play is going to regress over the next coming years as the league transcends into a league predicated on power. And so guys like Clase and Smith might not project as much as others on this list. So Cade Smith right now is my number 2 reliever on this list. And overall, someone who, at least for the time being, will project to be one of the elite relievers in the game. And he's proven it over the past couple of years. But now we have to look ahead to the long-term future, to how the MLB can change, and most importantly, how relievers are going to be viewed. So Cade Smith for now, but maybe not for later. But someone who I still think is going to stick around, even though he hasn't necessarily had the most postseason success. He is just someone who needed that culture change, in my opinion. Devin Williams, moving from Milwaukee to New York, gives him an opportunity to right the wrongs of recent years with Milwaukee in the postseason. That's his only kind of blemish on his resume. And he is someone who's still in the 98th, 99th percentile in terms of K rate, whiff rate, what have you. But ultimately, what I want to see out of him, we'll talk about this later in my last segment of today's show, is how he translates to this Yankees culture. Because the Yankees are going to demand a lot out of him. He, for now, ultimately projects as their number 1 reliever. And he's going to be tasked with closing out a lot of close games, not just in the regular season, but in the postseason as well. So if he's up for it, then I think that he will have a very nice career in New York. But this is highly different from the stake that he had in Milwaukee, because he could be forgiven at the very least in Milwaukee, not in New York. So that's what he's facing right now, and I wish good luck to him, because I think he is still the number 1 reliever and number 1 closer in the MLB. But New York is a different breed. And if you can't ultimately affiliate and ingratiate yourself to this roster, to this team, to this fan base, then you're in for a very rough ride. So you better bring it, Devin Williams, and prove that you're still the number one reliever. But that's my list for now. And coming up next, we'll be talking about two teams, the Mets and the Yankees, that potentially win it all in 2025. I'm going to talk about the challenges, though, that they might face, but also the powers and positives they bring to their lineups and the reasons, ultimately, why I think this way. Right back after this short break to talk about the Mets first.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere.
Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. And for our fourth segment of today's show, we're going to be doing something interesting here. We're going to be looking at certain teams who I believe are well equipped to win the 2025-26 World Series, starting off with two crosstown rivals, the New York Mets and the New York Yankees. And unfortunately, I wish I had more time to talk about more teams. I will get to one more team tomorrow, but I will leave that as a surprise. But for now, let's talk with these true crosstown rivals, starting off with the New York Mets. We know what they did in the offseason, and I don't need to remind you. It's Juan Soto, though, for those who still might be wondering about what I mean by that. But it's not just Juan Soto that makes this a promising team and a promising journey for the Mets as they embark on their 2025 season. What Soto brings, most importantly, to the makeup of this lineup is highly important in terms of this argument, because they right now, to me, have the best 1 through 4 top of the order in Major League Baseball. You have Francisco Lindor, the heartbeat of your team, leading off. Then you potentially could have Soto bat second and leave it up to Vientos to bring him in as someone who I think is going to be steadily improving even more year in, year out, especially defensively as well. And then you have Pete Alonso, who you were lucky to re-sign. That gives me hope and optimism in terms of how this Mets offense is going to look this year. It's very, very, very elite and very, very promising. But there still are questions, right? Because the bottom of that lineup might be filled with either young guys or veterans who might be getting up there in age and might be regressing a little bit too rapidly for my liking. Guys like Nimmo, guys like McNeil. And then the less we say of the injury road to this pitching rotation, the better. But the reason why this argument can come together if this Mets team looks like at its best, when everyone is healthy, when the top of the order is producing the runs for you, when these young guys coming through the ranks, maybe guys like Luis Angel Acuna, Ronnie Mauricio, and maybe Brett Beatty, when these pitchers are pitching well, and most importantly, remaining healthy, this is a Mets team that is a force to be reckoned with in the major leagues. But everything is a major if right now. Let's talk about the positives, right? The positives are that you have the depth you believe can lead you to deep runs in the postseason for years to come. And even though this depth is largely untested, it's depth that I feel that can improve because of the leaders in this clubhouse. For example, some might say that the infield depth the Mets have, especially at the shortstop position, is a problem, but you're being led by one of the greatest shortstops of his generation in Francisco Lindor. So young guys like Mauricio and Luis Angel Acuna are going to learn from him. He's going to take them under his wing, and they're most likely going to be better for it. But then I feel where the caveats are potentially other players amongst the infield. Beatty, is he going to improve? How about a guy like Jeff McNeil? How does he fit into all of this? Because he's someone who's aging out, still can hit for average at his best, but most likely is not going to benefit this team in the long run. So even though that depth is going to be important in terms of the maturation of this team, it also could lead to a detriment once all of these players are mature enough to play and there are questions around the infield as to who plays where. You know where Pete Alonso is going to play, and it's looking likely that Francisco Lindor is going to be your franchise shortstop for the time being. So where do Acuna, Mauricio, and Beatty factor in? And will Vientos, most importantly, the huge X factor in all of this in my opinion, continue to improve at third base? If all of those questions are answered, then this question, this argument, maybe even this segment gets rendered a moot point, because I truly believe that if all of those things come together, the Mets win the World Series. But it's not as simple as that, because there are a couple more underlying problems as well that we have to get into. Most importantly, the pitching situation. You were able to bring back Sean Manaea, which was huge. You were able to bring back Frankie Montas. You re-signed Paul Blackburn. You brought in a guy like Clay Holmes, who at best could be your fifth starter. You brought in a guy like AJ Minter, who profiled as a hybrid starter / middle reliever. But it's the injuries that worry me. A guy we haven't even mentioned, Kodai Senga, gets injured most of last season, only has 5 innings last season to show for how the Mets view him. So he's someone that you're going to have to monitor. And then Manaea, now in the 60-day IL with that oblique. Frankie Montas with that lat strain. Christian Scott, a promising youngster with a lat strain as well, potentially missing several months of the season. I just don't think that this pitching staff has enough depth outside of these quote-unquote 3, 4, 5 guys to sustain them should these injuries extend a little bit farther than the Mets think. Does Buto step into a role where he's going between the bullpen and starting? How about, a guy like Clay Holmes? How is he going to be utilized now that these injuries have occurred? How about guys like McGill and Peterson, who did perform well in certain pitchers' absences last year, but I still believe are not elite enough to be your aces to start a season, so to speak, which they might be? And will Kodai Senga, most importantly, remain healthy as your number one option? So the Mets pitching situation is one that certainly can be one that has enough depth to account for anything that occurs throughout the season. But the fact that a lot of injuries have happened in spring training and in the offseason thus far, 2 guys you've invested in and believe can be your top-end starters, in Manaea, in Montas, maybe even in a guy like Christian Scott. Now that worries me, because you have guys that can fit in at the back end of a rotation, but it has to include Manaea and Montas, and they can't just, start immediately as guys who are going to have to carry the load in the opening months of the season. So that's where my concern comes in. Because remember, the Mets did not start off last season well either. They were terrible to start the season. They had one of the worst records in baseball at the end of May, and that's where they kind of kicked it into gear. So if that's going to be a problem to start this season as well, if the pitching does not get figured out, then that could come back to bite them. But most importantly, I feel the reason why a lot of that can be accounted for is because when I look at the NL East and I look at the elite pitching within it, I feel the Mets can match up well week in, week out against that division. And so, even though it feels weird and cliche to say that, because all of these teams have a shot in the Phillies, Braves, and Mets to win this division, I just feel the Mets have a lot of balance in their lineup. A lot of guys who can balance out the top of the order. You have Francisco batting both ways. You have a guy in Vientos who bats righty. Then you have a guy in Juan Soto who bats lefty. Then a guy in Vientos who bats righty. So you see what I'm saying? They can develop a lineup that can get comfortable against these opposing NL East teams. And even though it's going to be tougher than last year because you didn't necessarily have, the theatrics of last year carrying over to this year because you lost Jose Iglesias, I still think that the Mets have the most depth in terms of how they can adjust their lineup week in, week out. And that's another thing that I really like about the Mets. They have a manager that I actually believe in. And Carlos Mendoza, a lot of people are going to be saying, well, he wasn't necessarily the most important factor in their run to the championship series last year. But the way he managed this team, the way he understood the dynamics of certain players, the way he trusted certain players, leads me to believe that this team is in good hands, especially considering the fact that this organization wants to have a concrete plan for as long as their championship window is open. They have the cash necessary to make big money moves if need be, but they truly believe that these young guys can grow and develop because of the foundation there of some of these established veterans, that they can mentor these young guys and they can become great players in their own right. We're already seeing it a little bit with the rise of Vientos, maybe even Alvarez this season will get a chance to prove that he can be a stalwart catcher in this league for years to come. He just needs to improve a little bit more both ways, in my opinion. But that's the hope here for the Mets. Have the veterans there, but also start to believe and invest in these young players, and chances are we're going to have a lot of success. So if I'm the Mets, I think that this formula is the formula you have to assume going forward, or else this whole project will not necessarily go well for you, what I call crashing down. But if you do, and you have the manager you believe in Carlos Mendoza to do it, then this plan could work. And that's why I think the Mets can not only win this World Series, but many World Series in years to come after that. They just have to rely on the formula. They sign Juan Soto. They have one big money signing. They have veterans, Lindor, Alonso, guys of that magnitude. Now they have the youngsters as well. Acuna, Mauricio, Beatty, Vientos, Alvarez. The formula is there. They just have to go out and do it. That's all I have to say about the matter. But coming next to conclude today's show, my penultimate show, gonna go across town to the Bronx, the boogie down Bronx, to talk about the New York Yankees. Be right back after this short break as well. Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. And for my final segment of my penultimate show here at the network, we're going to be talking about the crosstown rivals of the Mets, the New York baseball Yankees, the Bronx Bombers. Now, this team has adopted a drastically divergent aesthetic to their crosstown rivals, in my humble opinion. They let the New York Mets take Juan Soto, but the way they went about replacing him was very curious for this Yankees team. They're known for being the Bronx Bombers, but they actually made 2, nay 3, if you include a guy in Max Fried who fans have been clamoring over because he's a left-handed pitcher, astute defensive signings. Now, this Yankees team will always be known for its ability to produce runs and have elite power hitters amongst their ranks. But by signing both Paul Goldschmidt and Cody Bellinger, they were addressing a major need in their opinion. And it was glaringly clear what it was in that World Series: the defense. And who knows if Paul Goldschmidt and Cody Bellinger are still going to be elite enough hitters to where they truly can make an impact in that side of their game for the Yankees. But it's clearly something that the Yankees want to identify and nip in the bud. And I appreciate them for that, because now it gives their roster a lot of balance. And I see a clear path forward for the rotation, for how this infield can look and how this outfield projects now that both Paul Goldschmidt and Bellinger are amongst the ranks. And most importantly, Fried as well. So let's talk about how these acquisitions have balanced out this Yankees team. Most importantly, why it could lead to a World Series title for them. I think the problem with the Yankees last year was that they got too caught up in Judge and Soto being their go-to guys that they neglected the fact that this infield and outfield was A, young, and B, a little bit too iffy. Guys like Volpe and the fact that Judge had to move to center field. Chisholm played elite defensively, but there were still some players who kind of were iffy. Guys like Peraza, perhaps. Guys like LeMahieu or Cabrera, who were a bit iffy and made pivotal errors in the World Series, for that matter. But by addressing the infield woes and the outfield woes as well, and allowing Juan Soto to leave, I feel has cleared up a lot of areas of need for the Yankees. But I want to do something first with this rotation before we get into the outlook of this defense and this offense, most importantly. Because with the addition of Max Fried, who I believe was the most integral acquisition for the Yankees this offseason, you now have an elite top 4 in terms of how you can rotate. You now have balance where you can go lefty-righty, righty-lefty, or righty-lefty, righty-lefty if you want. I still think Garrett Cole is the ace in this particular staff. It's not going to change, but it allows you room, if you're Aaron Boone, to mix with this rotation. You can go Cole, Fried, Heel, Rodon, or you can go Fried, Cole, Rodon, Heel. And that's what I love about this. You can mix and match the point where you're befuddling opposing offenses with the ability to allow the rotation to move along naturally. Where before, they were too righty heavy. They relied too much on Cole and Heel at the top of the order, the rotation rather, to be the two righties to get going, and people might have been able to figure them out as a result a little bit more easily, even though both of them are elite pitchers in their own right. But now they have a set rotation, they have a set resting period, and most importantly, they profile better to the point where the weakness of this team, in my opinion, even though they also added depth here with Devin Williams, the bullpen isn't necessarily going to be revealed too much. Let's talk about this bullpen, because Devin Williams is a major factor here. But the reason why it still gives me pause is that Devin Williams was a Milwaukee Brewer before he was a New York Yankee. And Milwaukee is a very different market from the New York Yankees. Besides, you don't necessarily have a high-profile middle reliever. and Devin Williams is firmly, in my opinion, still a closer. I mean, Jake Cousins, Luke Weaver really played strong in the postseason as a middle reliever, but who's going to be the true guy to give you these extra innings in the middle of games? Because I don't know if that's clear enough for you. And Scott Efros now, someone who could have played a role in that, is now on the 60-day IL, so that gives you worry if you're a Yankees fan. But with the upside that Williams brings, even if he's just, say, a closer, really allows you to breathe a little easier. And it also allows for this pitching rotation to go deeper into games. Remember, that's what Garrett Cole kind of did in the postseason. He went deeper into games than people expected, performed very well in both the ALCS and World Series when he pitched deep into games. So that's what I think the Yankees are going to have to figure out most importantly this season. How they view these now 4 elite pitchers who set it perfectly for you, how long they can go in games, and how then you set up your bullpen to account for these 4 elite pitchers, because chances are some of the times these guys might have some blown saves that they might want back because of what happens in the middle relief. So that's what I'm trying to say here. Get to Devin Williams and you should be good to go. So that's what I think about the pitching staff. Now let's get into the changes they made defensively and how this team projects offensively. Let's start off defensively because they have mightily improved. Paul Goldschmidt and Cody Bellinger, let's face it, they're not necessarily the youngest of guys, especially Paul Goldschmidt. At least Cody Bellinger is still in his 20s, but Paul Goldschmidt is 37. But by bringing in 2 elite defensive infielders and outfielders, respectively, it allows for this team to calm down. I think a lot of what happened was that a lot of these younger guys, especially in the infield, guys like Volpe, guys like Peraza, Cabrera, made errors because they were a little bit sped up, in my opinion, in that World Series. They were thinking too far ahead, potentially overthinking for that matter, and that's what sped them up defensively. Jazz Chisholm, in my opinion, is a stalwart player in the infield for the Yankees, and he's not going anywhere. But it's about calming down some of these younger guys, and having Paul Goldschmidt there to mentor them is huge. Then in the outfield, it's just a matter of movement that completely alters the perception of this Yankees outfield, because last year, movement really was detrimental to the Yankees outfield because Juan Soto was playing naturally in center, but Judge was in unnatural position in right. Now with the addition of Bellinger, you can move Judge back to center field because Bellinger is comfortable playing anywhere in the outfield, in my opinion. And it allows a younger guy in Jason Dominguez to really grow and learn behind 2 elite defensive outfielders in Bellinger and Judge. And so that's what really matters to me if I'm a Yankees fan. The fact that even though losing Soto is painful because his power bat delivers runs for you, you have to start by looking at both sides of the coin here. Baseball is a double-edged sword. You can produce as many runs as possible, but it's not going to matter if your defense suffers. And so that's why, even though it's a bit of a stretch to expect Paul Goldschmidt and Cody Bellinger to be elite 2-way players, adding them to this defense alleviates the burden on the shoulders of the Volpes, the Perazas, and the Cabreras and the Dominguezes of the world, if that makes sense. Maybe it's at the risk of losing a couple of runs a game, because I don't necessarily think Paul Goldschmidt projects well in this ballpark as a hitter. Maybe Bellinger a little bit more, but both of them have been regressing in that area of their game. But ultimately, when I think about the Yankees, this was a sign of maturity. This was a sign of realizing that, yes, so does an elite player. And yes, he is someone who, even with his locker room antics, is someone who can deliver consistently for this team. We have to switch it up. Because in a similar way to the Mets, the Yankees are technically a young team, at the very least in terms of their infield and outfield. Sans Judge, Bellinger, Goldschmidt, and their pitching staff, so to speak. So you really have to cement a foundation for these youngest to build upon, because if all they remember is that experience, like, oh no, we did this together, then that can sit in their minds for many years of their career. But now they have someone to relax them. Now they have someone who can come in and naturally fill a role that was absent for them. That's a huge deal. And who cares if they're not as sexy as last year's team, with two, beautiful hitters in their lineup. It matters more about this development, because a lot of these guys, offensively, the young guys for the Yankees for that matter, Volpe, let's say Peraza maybe, Cabrera, even Dominguez, especially Dominguez in my opinion, are and project to be elite hitters in their own right. I love the way Volpe hits. Dominguez is known for his power hitting. So if you can bring out that side of them, chances are they ease in comfortably to this team. But it all comes down to the balance, right? And I believe that Yankees fans should be happy with the balance they've now maintained between this offense and defense. Now it all just has to come together on paper, because they're in the media circus. So everything just has to work, and nothing can go wrong. But that's why I think the Yankees can win the World Series. Let me know what you think in the comments, because that will just about do it for the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. Our final show will be tomorrow. I cannot believe it. It's been a wild ride, but I have been your host, Christopher Shepard. And tune in tomorrow for the final show at 2:55 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. As always, like, follow, and subscribe. Avail yourselves of the Super Chat, Super Things, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube, as always, to support the network even after I'm gone. But I'm out for today. See y'all tomorrow for the last ever time.